Today, I would like to talk about my current Agentic workspace configuration that I use to build new projects and build software with AI. So, the three pillars of this workspace are this project tracker application, which I'm currently in the midst of developing, my skills, so the core skills which my agents use to know how to do their jobs effectively, and my WES-term and CLI configurations for working with multiple agents on complex work in parallel. So these are the three things which I'll be covering today. I did want to preface this video by saying that a lot of my recent workspace and configuration has had influence from other resources such as articles online, LinkedIn, YouTube channels. One recent video in particular, which I watched, I wanted to give a shout out to Kun Chen, who put out a video on his specific agent configuration or workspace. And that was the inspiration for a lot of how I work today. So yeah, I'll be dropping a link to his video in the description down below. I'd encourage you to check it out. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into the first pillar of my current workspace configuration, which is this Agentic project tracker. Now, this is a tool which I wanted to build to solve a few problems which I was having. So my previous approach to, I guess, working on multiple projects in parallel and deferring workload to agents to get them to start contributing to these projects and building out tasks was to use this WES-term configuration where I could easily tab between different contexts and do multiple things in parallel, have different Claude CLI instances running. So let's say I want to create a new instance, a new terminal. I just go in and then type, let's say, Claude here within the Agentic workspace directory, and boom, we've got a new Claude instance running on that specific multiplexer window. So I can kind of trigger work on multiple projects in parallel taking that approach, but then there's a lot of tabbing between kind of multiplexer instances to track the state of that workload between agents. And for multiple different projects, that's an issue, especially when a lot of the tasks aren't really that complex. So I have a preference for actually doing that work inside of a terminal or a CLI or maybe a traditional IDE if it is a decent amount of complexity in the problem I'm trying to solve. So if I'm creating the scaffolding of the technical constraints or figuring out the architecture of the project that I'm trying to build or determine the tech stack I want to use, I like to kind of work in a CLI or an IDE environment where I can iterate and maybe apply spec-driven development a little bit easier. However, for doing smaller, more focused pieces of work, I find it easier to kind of not modify, but watch my agents do their workload asynchronously on multiple different projects. So that is the effective problem that this tool is solving. And what it allows me to do is define a dashboard of projects and view their current state with agents working on multiple smaller chunks or tasks in parallel. So as you can see here, I've got 5 main projects up and running. I have my Agentic project tracker project, which is this actual tool itself. And then I have my Agentic workspace, which is another repo or project I've set up so that I can easily set up my workspace on a new computer, whether it be Linux or Windows. I can just kind of, with one executable, I can just launch into having my workspace set up in that environment and then start work pretty much almost immediately. So those are the two big repositories which I've currently got in this view. And as we can see, if I jump into, let's say, my Agentic project tracker, we can see I've got a bunch of different tasks defined. And now defining tasks is something I do as I want to be able to control how the business requirements of this specific project are dictated. I want to be able to create these tasks and then defer them to an agent for execution. So here we can see the current tasks that is actively running is I want to have Claude usage bars under this little about section, and the agent is currently off and processing and working on this piece of work. However, you can see I've got this this inbox display of agents which are paused and waiting on a response from myself to basically unblock them. And in my inbox, you can see that specific agent is currently pending a response from me because it's blocked. This one is actually due to the fact that I've run out of usage credits on my current pro plan, but it's going to have to wait for me to unblock it. But yeah, in this view, we can see a bunch of diffs that the agent might be working on, which I don't think this has a good example of. So here, if I wanted to just see like a clean git diff of like what the agent has done versus what maybe might exist off master, this is where I would typically look. We can see different sessions, so we can see all of the sessions that have run against this particular project from the CLI or from my actual program itself, or if I'm running them from the IDE, they'll like have different flags to show me like where the origin of the session came from. I can see the pipeline for this project, so in this case, it's the CI pipeline here and releases that were targeted against this on GitHub. So all of this is through GitHub's API, but it is extendable so that if I had other CI or CD requirements, I could hook it up into this pipeline behavior here for that project. I can see the current release, which is being developed, and a bunch of changes which will be featured in this release once I decide to publish it. So alongside building out the tasks and getting agents to work on them in kind of asynchronously, like telling it to go off and like build the thing, once it completes, it kind of gets merged into the branch pending then actual official release and publication. So that's what this little section is for. I can just, when I'm ready and whatever tasks have been completed and ready to deploy, I can then go in here and ask an agent to publish the release, and it'll generate notes, release notes, and all that stuff for me. Make sure that all of the CI/CD things are passing as a prereq before actually doing that release. And then in my final view, I've got like analytics, so I can see repository clone metrics, views on GitHub. I can see a detailed breakdown of releases, and this is also highly extendable so that I can add different panes or analytics views as required. But in this iteration, most of it's just like a GitHub API driven. But yeah, in the future, maybe we'll see. Maybe I'll get like Vercel integrations or something like that. But the intended use case for this program in my current workflow is to just solve that view of working on multiple projects and doing like small tasks concurrently that I'm confident an agent can just do end to end and then give me like a small piece of review the work and then say, okay, that looks good, and kind of prep it for release and just monitor all of these projects concurrently to either free me up to do more important work or work on doing more impactful decision making. So when I say like more impactful decision making, that is going back to this kind of CLI view of working within the WESTerm terminal and working with spec-driven development to do the more impactful decision making for like a project. So that would typically be when I start up a new project, for instance, I want to make sure the architecture is correct. And through that, I would use like spec-driven development to explore different ideas. And that's not something that I would typically want to do in this program here. Another little bonus is when I am doing like any kind of git diffs and stuff, I've added this little button so I can just crack the project up in VS Code, and I can do a more detailed view of the git diff to kind of compare which changes were made by the agent. Because yeah, I find GUIs more intuitive than TUIs, so whenever I'm git diffing or wanting to see like what's changed, I do actually prefer either visualizing it in a diff format here or cracking it open in an IDE or something. Or in the past, I used to use like Tortoise Git, I think it was, which was a program entirely for like viewing Git diffs and that, but or Beyond Compare as well. But yeah. Okay, moving on. So we have the skills. So I did want to talk about my current skill setup because that does impact how confident I am in an agent being able to pick up a task, for instance, and complete it end to end. So that goes back to my actual skill configuration, which is an important layer to this puzzle that we're trying to solve. So if I take a look at my Agentic workspace and open that one up in VS Code, we can see I have Claude. Now, I am using Claude. I'm kind of locked into this ecosystem because I'm just wanting to pay for one subscription currently per month, and that is the Claude Pro plan, I believe. So that one is the one that is like 5 times more usage than the basic tier. And that impacts how I write skills, so keep that as a caveat to referencing, I guess, these resources in this video today. But I have, I guess, the entry point to my skills being the global file, which is this agents MD file here. And this agents MD is just a bunch of general rules that every single agent session will reference when making changes. So it is decently small. I wonder if I could actually optimize it a little bit further, but it needs to be small because you don't want to carry like this huge document with you in global state that gets referenced by every single agent session, because that would pad out the context window consumption of your agents, right, and make you pay more money. So I have this agents MD file, which was heavily inspired by Kan Chen's work on his video that he shared as well, but then adapted for my specific use case. So there's a few important things here, which the agent will just reference and then use this as like, I guess, a guide for general development. The Claude MD, similar to that. I think I've sim linked it to the agents MD. And what's interesting here is I don't actually need to install this into my local user space because the installed version is sim linked to my agents MD one here, I believe. So if I make a change here, it actually kind of is live for the next agent session. I don't know how like Claude works with caching the reference to the file, but like if I make a change here and then I start a new session, that change will be reflected in what the agent's looking at. So similar to that, I have opinions, which are general engineering opinions I have based on my own experience as an engineer over the past 8 years. So this is kind of like a guiding light for the agents to use when hitting a certain issue, or if they have a particular question or concern that sometimes they'll ask you while doing their kind of iterative design cycle. It will then reference this opinions document without needing to get further feedback, unless it's something that isn't listed here. But this is just a general good to have, I believe, because it's not necessarily cached unless the agent actually needs it, and then it will cite that file. So yeah, pretty good one there. And it's also just a collection of my viewpoints or experience from the past 8 years as an engineer. So then that way the output of the agents is a bigger reflection of how I would have wanted to write the code myself, which means if I am reviewing it, I have like less feedback on the structure or general changes that the agent is making. So further to that, that's, I guess, the general setup scripts of what I've got here for my skills. And what I then like to have is a general list of checks and balances that the agent will compare the code against. So it's going back to like, I guess, loop, like agentic loops, right? The idea of an agent being able to pick up a task, complete the task, do checks and balances, finish the task, check it in, and then start a new task. So that's kind of the agentic loop cycle. Now, my workflow isn't quite there yet. I'm not sure if that's necessarily something I want to adapt into my tool with the task implementations and like my skill integrations. I've got plans to have like a next skill so that I could potentially integrate loops into my workflow, but not quite there yet. I do, however, have this patrol skill, which gets dispatched as a pre-commit or pre-push check. So before the agent will come back to me saying the task is complete, there's a condition that all of these requirements need to be satisfied from the other skills. For instance, things like type check, linting, auditing, police, and tests. Now, the interesting one here that I like to look at is police, because this is something that is a bit unintuitive, I guess, and unique to agents themselves. So type checking, linting, that's fairly standard. You have a skill that just says, run ESLint on these changes, make sure it passes. If it doesn't, fix it, and then iterate and rerun, right? Police checks are non-native things that a computer would typically be able to check for that an agent can, right? So this is stuff like making sure no secrets exist. There's no standard way to ensure secrets don't exist. It's really hard to catch with linting because it's stuff that might be natively implemented different for different frameworks or technologies, but an agent can spot those things in comments, etc., right? Making sure endpoints have required authentication. Yeah, there's just like a few rules here, which are things that linters and I guess tests are unintuitive to check for, and that's what the police checks are effectively for. So behavioral rules enforced by the police skill against every chain set in this project. So then this definition is just, I guess, a baseline amount of checks that exist in this template here, and it will be then dispatched by this police check, and that's just to ensure like a layer of vulnerabilities are enforced, or security is enforced rather. So a layer of security is enforced to prevent certain vulnerabilities. So it's good to have this police check, and that's kind of similar to the audit checks as well. They're just to give you that sense of security in the code that the agents are writing. And if we move on from that, once we have the patrol script done and the agent is confident that everything is passing, we'll then, using this skill, it'll push it back to you for feedback, or it will just, like, based on the trajectory of your other skill setups, move to commit, push, release, etc. So I personally have a preference for liking to be part of that feedback loop when I'm working in the CLI. So like if I'm in the CLI doing stuff, I like to do the final commit push cycle, because the stuff I'm typically doing would be of high complexity. If I'm working in the CLI, that's my current thought process. Like I would be working on structural, architectural stuff, right? The important pieces of the puzzle, how the system actually works for the project that I'm trying to build and the business requirements I'm trying to solve for. So that would be my interpretation. However, if the agent is within the bounds of like a task using this agentic project tracker, I just like let the agent go off, do its commits, push into the CI/CD pipeline, and do an iterative cycle of fixing any failures before it then asks me for the final review. And that is then also integrated into my skill pipeline here. So like I've got ship and release and stuff like that. Now the final little step to this puzzle, I've got this equip skill. So what equip does is we have, let's say, different projects, right? So if I'm making this dashboard here and I've got 5 different projects, each of these projects, after having gone through their kind of initial design and architecture phases, and where I've kind of established the tech stack requirements for that specific project and pushed out the first commit to set it up and get the scaffolding right, we now know kind of what linting requirements we might have, what our build scripts might look like, right? So what our test suites that we're going to leverage for that project's tests will look like. So this equip skill, basically you run it once against a project, or you can run it more times, but typically you'd run it once at the start when you know that tech stack requirement, and it will adapt all of these like police, linting, test, type check skills and create them for your specific project's use case. Because maybe this project is using NUnit and this project is using vtest, right? So they have different test suite requirements, and the skills themselves would have like different CLI calls that need to happen. So that's what this equip skill is, and it's something that I would typically run manually once the project is configured and ready to go. And yeah, I mean, I believe that is the majority of my skills that I'm currently using on a day-to-day basis to kind of bootstrap my projects and get them ready. And then once the project is established, I have these tasks that I can just go and create new tasks for. Now, as mentioned, I do want to actually integrate a layer of looping into this system where like an agent can just pick up the next task and just keep working until all the tasks in the queue are done, and then maybe create tasks itself when it finds defects, etc., stuff like that, so that this whole process becomes a little bit more autonomous. But my workflow isn't there yet, and maybe I can create another video once I've kind of adapted my workflow to that use case. But as it stands, if I have a task and then I have a second task I want to start work on, I basically just click delegate to agent and it gets chucked in the queue. So once this one's approved and done, then the next task will be started for this project, and any amount of projects can have a task running at the same time. So like, as you can see in this dashboard, this one has a task that's currently running. So we can see one has input and two are queued, and none of my other projects currently have tasks running, which I should probably start making tasks for. Anyway, that is the predominant part of my workflow that I'm currently using. I'm not very IDE focused right now. I pretty much just use it for reviews, like code reviews and debugging when I need to. But yeah, most of my process is done either in the terminal or in this new app that I'm currently building. And a link for the app, like a download link to the actual repo and the releases for the Agentic project tracker, will be in the description down below, as well as my Agentic workspace, which I want to now talk about. So my WesTerm configuration is the core building block of how I like to work with multiple agent sessions in parallel and monitor like the larger chunks of work in my workflow today if I'm doing like more important stuff that I want more agent oversight over. So as an example, I'm in WesTerm right now, and you can see this window is taking up the full screen, which is what I like. So I can see more text on the screen. And you can see how I've kind of split out the chunks so that I've got three components here. I've got my agent running on the left. I've got my just regular terminal window here for running like git commands, so I can see like git statuses, and maybe I'll do like a git log one line to see all the commits that my agent is doing. Or I've also got this second window on the right, which maybe I'll want to run an npm run dev, so I can have a dev server running and I can functionally test the changes the agent's making, and I can do that all in one terminal window that's running like a multiplexer, so I can have multiple terminals in this one tab. The cool thing about this is I actually made a widget which shows off a bunch of shortcuts that I can use within my WesTerm configuration, and this is just an overlay. When I do leader question mark key in combination, it'll show this little overlay that has a bunch of shortcuts here that are commonly used within like NVim or the Mux window, and then also Claude. If I hit escape now, that'll go away, but that's this little widget that I built within my actual WesTerm configuration. And what I'm able then to effectively do is context switch between a bunch of projects. So like on the second tab, I might have a bunch of other terminals configured for a second project I'm building in parallel and waiting on agent responses, or maybe doing like git commands to do code reviews and that kind of stuff. So it is helpful. And the one other cool thing about this is that I'm actually running like a terminal multiplexer server in the background, so that it's kind of monitoring session state and allowing it to persist. So like if I was to hit Alt F4 now to close my WesTerm, if I reopen it, I'll be left in the exact same session state that I was when I closed, right? So There are some visual issues I still have to figure out with my WesTerm configuration, but that's kind of what it looks like. So why I prefer this over an IDE is I feel like it's a bit more intuitive to navigate between agent sessions and do multiple things in parallel. Whereas with the IDE approach, I'm kind of having to crack open tabs and there's no easy hotkeys to navigate between the different session states that I'd like to be able to navigate between, I suppose. So how this actually works under the hood. Let's take a look at my GitHub repository. So I've got all of my configuration files in this .config directory, which you can see that's for like nvim, WesTerm, this open code one. And this basically just reinforces how the persistent state works and like the WesTerm config for like colors and how it's transparent and you're able to see through it, that kind of stuff. And all of this lives within the repo. Alongside that, I have a bunch of Bootstrapper PowerShell scripts, which allow me to effectively install these settings and dependencies on a new machine if I'd like. So one of the cool things about that is if my computer bricks itself, or if I want to get a new laptop and start working from a coffee shop, for instance, I can go to my repository, download all of the source, and then just run my PowerShell script. And within 10 minutes, I'm working as I normally would have been, with the exact same configuration loaded on that device, right? So running this setup script will navigate to like the bootstrappers, and I have a bunch of dependencies preloaded into here, like open code and the WesTerm config, and it'll just open it up with all of my existing settings, which is nice. And if I have like custom tools that I use as well, for instance, like this Agentic project tracker, I'll probably be integrating that into my Bootstrapper as well once that tool is ready, so I can have like a really customized experience that just gets preloaded when I run this PowerShell script. The reason I decided to use WesTerm as well was because it's kind of cross-platform, so I don't need to worry about configuration not working if I migrate to Linux. Because in the past I was more of a Linux developer for a short while, where I was using a different operating system and doing some experimentation. But yeah, that's pretty much, I guess, my current configuration with WesTerm and my preference for using this program that I'm deciding to build to optimize my current workflow for doing things in parallel and being able to contribute to multiple projects at the same time and oversee what my agents are doing and be able to manage everything in one kind of big holistic view. Thanks for watching the video, and if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below.